On September 24th, 1984, Gene Hepner and Vicki Nelson set a world record. But it was not a record that they were proud of. They played the single longest point in a tennis match. Now, to give you an idea of how long this point was, 2 months ago there was a professional tennis match that went 53 hits back and forth. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those two players said it was the longest rally they could remember. In 1984, Nelson and Hepner had a rally that lasted 643 hits. 29 minutes for a single point. And a tennis match that lasted 6 hours and 31 minutes. Still the longest match in a single day ever played. At the end of that period of time, they described themselves as being utterly exhausted. In fact, Vicki Nelson collapsed with cramps in her legs. Gene Hepner gave up tennis altogether. I may never play a 6-hour tennis match. In fact, it is very unlikely I will not. However, I have felt that exhaustion, where all of the things of life pile up. I think of my family and my job. I think of the church and my friends and all of the responsibilities that are part of our lives on a regular basis. And sometimes I feel utterly exhausted. And that's not even including the sucker punches that life takes at us sometimes. The smaller things like the morning when you see your child's lunch sitting on the counter. He's already gone to school. You're running late for a meeting, and you can't find the keys. When you walk out and you get into the car and you go to turn it on, and nothing happens. Or the bigger things, like when you get that phone call and a loved one, a good friend, has been diagnosed with a terminal illness. There are so many things in our normal life, and then all the extras that are just piled up, that make me feel exhausted sometimes, and I want to lose heart. Like Vicki Nelson, I just want to collapse. Or, like Gene Hepner, sometimes just give up. The Apostle Paul, he goes through some things that would make any normal person want to give up because they look like the things we go through. And yet, he says twice in chapter 4, we do not lose heart. And this morning, I want to take you through some of the things that could have made the apostle lose heart. Some of the same things that you and I face. And then look how he overcame them. Because he did not lose heart, no matter how difficult it became. If you would like to, take your pew Bible and turn to page 1144, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. We're going to start right at the first verse. What is it that could have made Paul lose heart, could have made him give up? I want to point out two things in this chapter, although there are a lot more. Chapter 4, verse 1, therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. We'll see that again toward the end in verse 16. We do not lose heart. He says, rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception. We do not distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. Now pay particular attention to verse 3. And even if our gospel is veiled, and I'm going to come back and explain that, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Let me tell you the first thing that Paul struggled with: failure. The Apostle Paul was a failure. Now, you may have never thought of that before, because you look at the New Testament, and he wrote half the books in here. If you think about some of his missionary journeys, he's responsible for bringing the gospel through Galatia, Asia Minor, Macedonia, Greece. He was met by the risen Christ on a road, converted and given a commission to be the Gentile to the apostles. Failure and Apostle Paul don't seem to go in the same sentence too often. And yet, consider Corinth for a moment. Corinth is probably the third most important city in the Roman Empire. 1,000,000 people in this city. In 2005, Dallas had 1.2 million, to give you an idea of how big this city was. And when you reconstruct what the church looked like going through Paul's letters, you've got 5, 6, 7 house churches, little cell groups. They all fit inside of one man's house. There are scholars who believe that the Corinthian church may have been around 50 people. Now take that in. The Apostle Paul, commissioned by Christ, performs miracles, comes in and proclaims the word to 1,000,000 people, and 50 of them convert. Paul saw far more rejection than he ever saw acceptance. And from city to city where he went, it was the same story. More people rejected or persecuted the apostle than ever embraced his message. He could be considered a failure, depending upon how you looked at it. He certainly didn't convert a lot of people. And in fact, verse 4, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light. Paul even recognized that there was nothing he could do about it. Have you been in that situation where not only did you fail at something, but you thought, I couldn't have done anything else? How else could there's nothing. Paul, he experienced that all the time. In fact, there were even false teachers that got bigger followings than Paul did. Paul understood failure, but he kept going. Let me show you one other thing that Paul experienced. Look at verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. I want to open this up for you so you can see what the apostle was going through. When he said we are hard-pressed, it's the word that means pressure. You might think of it today as when you feel the weight of responsibility on your shoulders, when you feel all of the pressure and almost like you just want to buckle underneath it, and you think to yourself, I've got to carry this because there's nobody else to do it. There's no way out of the responsibilities that I have, and it's just wearing me down. He is hard-pressed on every side. Or, he says perplexed. The Apostle Paul was puzzled. He was at a loss. He did not have all the answers. This great apostle did not have all the answers. And in fact, you see it in some of his letters. You see it come out in his frustration. He'll be writing to a group and he'll say, why are you following this gospel? That's not what I gave you. Or even in this letter here, where we realize that right before this, there was a guy who was a false teacher in the church and people started following and Paul's going, why? Why are you turning against me and going after him? Paul understood not having the answers. He understood that feeling of, just tell me what to do. I don't know. He was perplexed.
To make a monetary gift that supports the ministries of Christ Church Plano, visit christchurchplano.org.